That's what happened to Mae Brussel too. Well, we
Yes, I do Mae Brussel.
yeah, well, we appreciate your articulateness, and this time is really special. Now, Michael Apted, pretty good filmmaker. Uh, yeah, I interviewed him 30 years ago, and I asked him why do rock video makers feel so obliged to edit fast. He said because we've learned to take in information faster. So I usually ask, have we learned to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can take in information faster? So it's basically, the question is, can we really multitask?
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with the fast cutting is taking information. There's a kind of a dichotomy going on here. They say that we're losing our ability to our long-term ability to think, yet the films are getting cut faster, which would imply that we were taking in the information even faster. Because if you're cutting faster, that means that they're communicating with us faster, which must mean that we are learning to take in information faster, which goes against this whole idea that we're learning or we're stopping or we're atrophying our ability for long-term thinking. So I disagree with that view at all. I think that the fact that a modern person can sit and watch a film that has 100 cuts a minute in some of these films that are out these days have such fast cutting, especially Tony Scott's movies, the late great Tony Scott, that I think that the people that are saying that are of the literate world, of which I am. I'm of the old school literate, read a lot of books school, unlike the Generation X and millennials who don't read hardly at all. And I think that the misread is that that they're getting dumber. I don't think they're getting dumber. I think that they're learning how to read the symbolic. And we didn't have the symbolic because the symbolic doesn't exist in the literate world. It exists in the visual world. And so I think these are the grousings of people who don't get it. They don't get that the newer generation is understanding things in a much more higher symbolic way. And I think that this movie Samsara, which is all symbol, is the best example of that. And I would bet you're going to find that the people who like Samsara are going to be younger, and that the people who don't like it are going to be 60 and above. Although there's going to be a lot of people 60 and above who are going to like it just because it appeals to certain countercultural things that members of the boomer generation would like. So I believe that movies are actually getting more complex. A movie like Christopher Nolan's Inception, which has to be the most difficult story ever put to film and still have it be comprehensible I've ever seen. And I don't think 20 years ago, if you had made Inception, or 30 years ago, anybody would have understood it. Anybody. I don't think anybody would have understood it, but we understand it today. And that's pretty amazing, actually.
What's faster, the speed of light or the speed of thought?
Speed of thought. Because they've done experiments where they'll split a molecule, and one atom will go this way and another atom goes this way, and then they turn and will turn this atom, and even though they're 20 miles apart in the particle accelerator, the other atom turns at the same exact minute, or same exact moment. So it passed. They're moving faster than the speed of thought, and we know what we call sympathetic resonance, which is you're in a room with a piano and you have a guitar and you hit the D sharp on the guitar, and the D sharp string on the piano immediately begins vibrating, and so we know that there is this thing which allows information to pass between two different constructs with no interval of time. And so the whole thing with the speed of light is a problem in its own, because Einstein grew up in a monochronic culture. A culture only has one time. When we don't live in a monochronic world, we live in a polychronic world. All you have to do is spend a minute sitting on a hot stove, and it'll seem like 100 years. Or spending one moment talking to a beautiful woman, I mean, an hour talking to a beautiful woman will seem like 1 second to a horny man. And so I think we can see that time is not 1 second after another. That's a construct we constructed to have this mechanized world that we live in. So we can all catch a plane at the same time. We can all meet for dinner at the same time. Everybody shows up at work at the same time. It's why there's rush hour, all the ludicrous things that we have built in our society, which are false constructs, which have perverted our brains. The idea that time has some kind of interval of the same nature is a false idea, and we're living it as a religion now, and that is going to end up destroying this world and us.
Well put. Both Frank Zappa and James Joyce said all times are happening now. So the next question.
Oh, well, those are two of my very favorite people.
Yeah. So the next question is, Jay, what was the motive of the cave artist?
Well, it had several motives and intentions. We now know that the caves at Lascaux were constellations. The bull at Lascaux is Taurus. We now know that it's a symbol. It's the drawing out of the constellations in the sky, which I think is a very important thing, because the first art that we have on Earth is a symbolic reinterpretation of the stars in the sky. And so why would they want to do that? Well, the reason they want to do that is for the subject I just touched on, to evoke the polychronic nature of this world, that nature isn't a sequential set of seconds and minutes following each other. Nature is a cycle. The stars move in a cycle. They move in a daily cycle, they move in a yearly cycle, and they move in a precessional cycle, which is once every 26,000 years they go all the way around themselves. And by understanding this, the movement of stars, which we have lost, our ancestors were trying to tell their people following them that time moves in cycles, that do not get caught in a monochronic mistake. Remember that just because things are bad now doesn't mean they're going to be bad later. Just because things are great now doesn't mean they're going to be great later. The seasons change. Noon is as different from midnight as spring is from fall. And also there's seasonal changes within the larger dynamic of time. So, and the Egyptians were obsessed not with, if you read the hieroglyphs and read Egyptian history from their point of view, they were not obsessed with what king, what pharaoh followed what pharaoh, what war followed what war. What they were incredibly obsessed with was when two disparate things occurred thousands or hundreds of years apart that were exactly the same. So there would be a battle with with Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, in which a king or a pharaoh died on his white horse with a sword through his throat. And then 480 years later, at the same exact spot, a pharaoh died on a white horse with a sword hitting him right through the throat. And that would be what they would obsess on. It would be sort of like our histories being obsessed with the fact that Abraham Lincoln, had a secretary named Kennedy, and President Kennedy, had a secretary named Lincoln, and that they were both killed, in the 1860s and the 1960s, and they were both obsessed with racial conflicts inside the United States, and that they were
Well, you know what?